Good afternoon, everyone. All right, there we go. We appreciate your patience. We really, more than that, appreciate your being here. And again, I think I want us to again welcome you, those of you who joined us late. On behalf of Dean Minow and the entire law school, I'm David Harris from the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice here at the law school, who has worked with a group of unbelievable colleagues to make this happen. We really are pleased and excited at what we've been able to do today. And I wanted to repeat something that I had said earlier today, because I really think it's important for us to try to change the way we think and talk about the work we do. And specifically, I had asked us to try to eliminate the use of the term criminal justice system from our vocabulary. I really think we need to replace it with the idea that we need to create a culture of justice in our country and start to think about what it would take to do that. Toward that end, I want to invite anybody who hasn't had a chance to, but is willing to share with us their idea of what justice is with us. We have a videographer with us for a few more minutes down the hall who would be willing to do that. We're also glad that we were able to provide some lunch for any of those of you who didn't happen to get their lunch. There is a cafeteria downstairs if you're really desperate. With that, the last thing I want to say, I have to say that all conferences always have a group of people standing up in front as if they've done it, and this group has done a lot. But for this conference and for everything we do at the Houston Institute, they're going to all speak. I want to call out two people, Ernest Owens and Kelly Garvin of our staff, who really do all the work that makes this happen. Ernest is here and Kelly isn't, but with that, I also have to say that it's been a real pleasure for me to be able to work with the rest of the people here who are really going to take this over. And I think before they speak, I do want to lead us in a round of applause for our colleagues who will speak in a minute. And now, Rachel Corey.
Hi, all. I'm Rachel Corey from the Criminal Justice Policy Coalition. I really appreciate you all being here today. We started organizing this almost a year ago, and I already knew Barb and Jean, who are going to speak shortly, but I was introduced to the Houston Institute, and they welcomed me with open arms. So I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate you all coming here today, seeing the fruition of it. So I'm just going to do a couple logistical things, a couple introduction things, and then turn it over. So after the police panel, we're going to have an opportunity for you to talk more about what you've learned today if you want. So in this room, the police accountability conversation will continue with Curtis Rowlands, who is one of the panelists. In 2012, scratch that. Next door, folks who are formerly incarcerated or who have a loved one who is or was incarcerated will gather, and that will be led by Lakeisha Muhammad. That'll be next door. And then in 2009, Mallory will be leading Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is like an explicitly white group to come together to really figure out how white people can contribute to racial justice. And I got that a little mixed up. Curtis is going to be in 2012, which is right out there. And I'll announce these at the end, too. There will be more space for you if you have an idea of what you want to talk about after this panel. And you can stay here, and I'll have paper for you to fill out to announce to folks what you want to talk about. Okay, so I'll clearly state that at the end of the panel. But I also wanted to introduce the title of the conference, Massachusetts and the Carceral State. We didn't want to just say that we were a conference about criminal justice reform. We wanted to encompass more than that, and the reality it is that the criminal justice system reaches into more parts of our lives than just the criminal justice system. It's in our bedrooms, in our relationships, in our schools, and hopefully some of the workshops today highlighted that and gave you ideas how to move forward and connected you to more folks. We really wanted to create a shared experience that we can move together forward. It's not the beginning. Folks have been working on this for generations, but it's a place that hopefully you made some connections to move forward. So I want to thank you for that, and now turn it over to Barb.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Barb Dugan with the Massachusetts chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, and thank you, as everyone keeps saying, for all of you who are here. Three quick housekeeping matters. First of all, there's stacks of evaluation forms on the registration table. If you would please fill those out, it will help us know where we stumbled, where we did right. Who knows how the balance will come out, and help those who want to work on this going forward for the next event. And hopefully it will involve all of you. The second thing is there's a timeline here of major events that have happened in Massachusetts. It is Boston-centric, but it's also statewide things. And we would invite you to add your own views before we're done. The final thing is there's going to be a short period between the end of the panel and when you break out into your follow-up groups. We're going to have announcements where urgent action is needed. We ask to not have that period turn into the discussion groups, but in fact just for very specific announcements that need to be made. Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm Jean Traunstein, and I'm here representing Coalition for Effective Public Safety. Some of you know me, as I said this morning, because I send out 1 million emails, and I'm a writer. I wanted to just say one thing of why I think this conference is so important, to underscore something that was mentioned earlier. We need to be better connected in Massachusetts in order to get things done. And that came home to me very clearly after 3 strikes. And a lot of us thought we were going to get that law defeated, but we didn't. So one of my hopes from this conference is that we can all work together in our various and sundry organizations to get more accomplished. Please tweet Mass Carceral if you are tweeting. Capital M-A-S-S, capital C-A-R-C-E-R-A-L. Also, I just wanted to point out the artwork in case you haven't had a chance to look at the artwork from prisoners. Some of it is up for bid, and you can get some of the artwork. Finally, I want to thank our table people who are here doing honorable work, sitting all day, talking about their organizations. And I want to thank our, our chief sponsor, the Gardner Howland Shaw Foundation, and all of the rest of you who donated to help make this possible. Raising money, as I've learned from this, is an absolutely impossible task. Even if you're at a wealthy university, we had to raise all of this money ourselves, and we did. So thank you very much for helping us. That said, I'm going to introduce Johanna Wald.
Hi, I'm Johanna Wald. I work with David Harris at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute. We're really delighted that you're all here and thrilled that you would take a Sunday to spend time at this conference. Serendipitously, at the same time that we planned this conference, we learned that Anna DeVere Smith is currently at the ART performing in a one-woman show. She is, as many of you know, a social activist. She's an actress, and she is a playwright. And she has put together a show entitled Notes from the Field, Doing Time in Education, which is about the school-to-prison pipeline. And it's been traveling all over the country. It's here at the ART, and it's focused on Massachusetts and what's going on in Massachusetts. So we asked Anna if she would participate or contribute in some way to this conference, and we're very delighted. She has sent a message to all of you, which we're now going to play. And after that, Carol Rose will bring her panel up, and we'll start the panel.
Good afternoon. I'm Anna DeVere Smith in Cambridge this month, performing in Notes from the Field at the American Repertory Theater. While I am unable to join you in person this weekend, I join hands with each of you in your individual and collective quests to dismantle the carceral state in Massachusetts and to replace it with a more fair and equitable justice system. Robert Kennedy once said, "Each time a man or woman stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he or she sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance." That is what you're doing this weekend, building a current, and that is how we will bring change to Massachusetts and across the country. In creating Notes from the Field, I've been speaking with students, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, police, and advocates all over the country to learn why so many of our young people are being pushed out of school and into prisons and jails. I have discovered that while there are very few bad people, we have created a monstrous system that devours and traps our young and pushes them deeper and deeper into a maze from which they cannot extricate themselves. So I think of each of you as part savior, part architect, and part demolition expert, tasked with the job of not only rescuing individuals from that maze, but of collectively figuring out how to blaze new exits out of that maze, tear down the walls, and flood it with sunlight. This weekend, you will be surrounded by creative, committed, and caring champions of justice, like yourself. I urge you to listen as much as you talk, and to be receptive to new ideas from wherever and however they emerge. It may be in the whispers of the person next to you where you find inspiration, the seed of a brilliant new strategy, or the faith that those lonely ripples that you keep sending out will somehow find one another and build a current. I close by giving each of you a standing ovation for your passion, your energy, and your vision.
Hi, can you all hear me? Yep. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carol Rose. I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Massachusetts. I'm the least important person up here. We've got an amazing panel of experts to talk to today, to talk with one another, to talk with all of you, and hopefully in the workshop after to hear back from many of you. So I'm going to go quickly through an introduction of the people and the way we thought we'd structure this, because our panelists have this wide and really diverse array of experiences and expertise. So we are going to frame the conversation in two ways. The first is we're going to start off with a conversation about some recent tactical victories and lessons that we've had, sort of notes from the field, if you would, and to talk about those and what we can learn. And then we want to save the second half of the conversation to really talk about some radical visions and strategic visions for the future. When I say radical, I think what we mean is radical in the actual use of the word radical, meaning you pull something up by the roots and you look at it, right? To begin to look forward and to think about radical visioning. So we're going to spend the second half talking about that. So just to give you a little bit of a roadmap where we hope to go over the next hour or so. So anyway, so our panelists today, I'm going to start right here from the right. You can't hear me? Okay. Can you hear me now?
You're going to get the mic closer.
How's that? Is that better? All right, great. Thank you. All right, we have Curtis Rollins, who's here from the Boston Workers Alliance and the NAACP Boston office. We have Muska Nasseri, who's for the Boston Police Camera Action Team, BPCAT. We have Derica Purnell, who's a student here at Harvard Law School, among many other things that she's doing. She's going to help us be understanding the Black Lives Matter policy prescriptions that they've put out. We have Yvonne, Yvonne Espinoza Madrigal. Got it? Good. Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice here in Boston.
Carl Williams, staff attorney at the ACLU of Massachusetts. So why don't we kick it off, Mr. Cup, by having you begin to talk a little bit, notes from the field, about what's been going on with BP CAT and the Boston Police Department and cameras.
Sure. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so as she said, my name is Muska Nasseri, and I'm here representing the Boston Camera Action Team. Just for a quick overview, raise your hand if you've heard anything about body cameras recently. Wonderful. Okay, great. So just to give you an overview, so the Boston Police Camera Action Team was formed in 2014, shortly after the death of Michael Brown. And since then, we've been working tirelessly to try to get body cameras to be implemented citywide in Boston, and it's been a struggle, and I'm sure as many of you guys that just raise your hand, you're familiar with the struggle that we went through, first with the Boston Police Department and most recently with the Boston unions. So what I would like to say, just as a brief overview, is that we were successful in getting Police Commissioner Evans to agree to a pilot program, and we're very happy about that because it took 2 years and a lot of meetings, a lot of city council hearings to get that to happen. But there are still a lot of problems with the pilot program, and that's what I'm here today to talk to you guys about. And there are 3 big problems that I'm going to outline. And the first is that the pilot program originally it was voluntary, and we had a big issue with that. And what Commissioner Evans was going to do is ask for 100 volunteers to come forward. They would be paid $500 each to join this pilot program for 6 months. And we had serious issues with that because we weren't sure if any volunteers would volunteer. And what do you know? No volunteers volunteered. So what happened after that is Commissioner Evans said, fine, if there are no volunteers, we will assign 100 people. That upset the unions. And just recently, the Boston Union filed an injunction to halt the program because they had an understanding that they would only agree to this pilot program if it was voluntary. And I'm not sure if any of you guys heard just recently Friday the outcome of that injunction. Did anybody hear about that? Yeah? So you heard that the judge denied that motion, which is wonderful. So the pilot program is going to start tomorrow, and it's going to be 100 people that are appointed by Commissioner Evans. Now, we still have an issue with the fact that it's only 100 people. That's a big problem. It's a very small subsect of the overall Boston police officers. We're worried that that's just not going to be enough data. And without a lot of data after the 6 months, we're afraid that the conclusion is going to be, well, we don't really know if this has made any effect. Well, that could be because there are only 100 officers. So that's number one. That's our first big issue. The second big issue with the policy right now, and I should say that if you want to look at the policy, if you go to bpcat.org, you can see the police's policy and the policy that we proposed, where we came up with a whole written policy, which we said that the Boston Police Department could adapt in part or in whole. And they adopted probably 60%. But anyway, a big problem with the policy right now, the police department's policy, is that it allows police officers to look at the footage before they write their police report. Now that's very problematic because what that does is it opens a loophole so that the police officer can look at the footage and tailor their report to what it says in the footage. That is a big problem that we have consistently brought forth to Commissioner Evans, and we haven't heard any feedback. And the third big problem is consequences. When we decided as an organization that we were going to do research, we were going to write a policy for the police department, the number one thing we thought about is we want there to be consequences. What is the point of having body cameras if you don't have a policy that says, what happens if a police officer deactivates that camera, right? What's the point of a rule without a consequence? So we had outlined in our policy a whole list of consequences that would affect officers who violated the program. And of course, the Boston Police Department's policy really minimized the consequences. And in fact, it says that any police officer who deactivates their camera for a minor incident will not be disciplined, and didn't define what is a minor incident. So that is a big concern of ours. So that's just a brief overview of the 3 big problems that we have that we still need your help with. And we would love for you to reach out to any of your legislators, city councilors, and address those specific 3 things. And again, the voluntary nature, or the fact that it's just 100 officers, that officers are allowed to view the footage before they write their police report. And third, that there are no consequences in their policy, and they do not define what a minor incident is. And that's,
Good.
I'll
So we're going to
leave it open.
in a minute.
Sure.
Yvonne, can you talk a little bit about the Lawyers City's work on issues of diversity within the police department?
Yes, thank you. One thing that I wanted to share is just in general, when we started doing our work on police accountability a little bit over a year ago, I got called in by one of the city councilors, who shall remain nameless, and I was summoned to his office, and he basically said to me, I hear that you've been criticizing the Boston police in the media, in public, in community meetings, in conferences like this. And he said, I called you in so I could talk about the protocol that you should follow when you do your work against the police. And I was floored. I was floored because, police accountability and transparency is critically important for everyone in this room. It's critically important for all communities, regardless of color and income. And to have essentially a muscle being placed on people who want to speak about these issues is unsafe. It is counterproductive to the work that we need to do. And we need to make sure that as we're doing this work, that we're standing up to those type of voices and forces. So what triggered, right, like that summoning was a series of cases that we had actually been bringing against the police department, saying that the police department had discriminatory policies within the department that affected officers of color, right? There's been so much conversation, which is fabulous, on the ground about the way body cameras and other policies impact the individuals who encounter police officers. And so we thought we could add a different lens to this conversation by focusing on the experience of minority officers within the force. What are they seeing? What are they hearing from their colleagues? How are they being treated? Because if you are not being treated with respect when you're a black police officer, you think that those colleagues who disrespected you are going to go out to the street and treat civilians with respect? I don't think so. So we started tackling some of the policies internally. In December, late December, early January, we won a case in the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, where the court found that our client had actually been discriminated and being terminated, right? Essentially, this pattern and practice of severely disciplining Black and Latino cadets in the academy, of recruits in the academy, kicking them out for offenses that white officers would not be kicked out for. And so then the court said you have to cease and desist from this systemic practice of discriminating against the recruits. And then after that, we, in conjunction with that, we've been fighting a number of other battles. We are challenging the drug screening mechanism that the police department uses, because the court actually, in our case, found that we were right, that the drug screening mechanism was resulting in false positives with respect to minority officers who were taking the test. And so what happens when we have these victories, when we actually have a court saying you are treating recruits unfairly, disparately based on their race, or you have protocols and procedures like your drug screening mechanism that is having a disparity within officers of color? Instead of showing up, coming out in front of it, the police is fighting us at every turn, appealing, right? Trying to make sure that we cannot move forward. That's not what this is about. This isn't about us versus them. We're trying to create a better police department, a better system. It makes a lot more sense to be working with us to implement innovative, creative things like the body cams, right? We should be exploring other creative things within the police department to make sure that there's transparency and accountability. And we believe that diversity is a critical component of that transparency and accountability, particularly in a city where 1 out of every 3 Black residents in a recent poll said that they do not believe that BPD can be trusted or that they get treated equitably and fairly. It is dangerous to have such a large number of people in our community who don't trust the police. It sows deep mistrust. It weakens public safety. Victims and witnesses of crimes become reluctant to approach the police, and that erosion in trust in law enforcement is harmful not only to people of color, but to all residents. So I'm happy to continue talking about this, but just wanted to lay the stage for this conversation about not just what are things that are happening as civilians interface with the police, but also internal to the police, and that we should be thinking very critically about that as another front that we need to be tackling.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting. Both of you talked about police reform needing, sort of requiring you ultimately to go to the court to get some kind of change, whether it was MCAD or the courts or whatever, in part. But we have a room of people here who are also activists and civilians out here. What role do they play in terms of the interface between the courts, getting law reform that way, but also getting law reform in other forums, whether it's a legislative forum or a field forum or a public opinion forum? And I open it up to all of the panelists to begin to talk a little bit. Carl, I can see you have.
So I'm going to brag about the ACLU because Carol told me to.
No, I did not. That is not.
No, that isn't true.
I give you permission.
But I get extra point. I'm going to get a raise for that. So I'm going to talk about another case, litigation that happened. The ACLU had a number of cases across the country and nationally on gay marriage, right? And people know when that case was filed. This is a trick question. Do people know when we filed the gay marriage case for the first time? Like 1974, right? Ooh, everyone gasped. That was what I was hoping for. 1974, we made an argument, very good argument, that didn't work. Gay marriage was not legal in this country. It was not constitutionally protected in this country in 1974. We made basically the same argument, right? 3 decades later, and we won. Why is that? It's not because the person standing in front of the Supreme Court, the person standing in a court was making a better argument. It's because people like you, people like us, were in the streets raising hell. It was a lot because millennials came of age and were like, this is ridiculous. Like, why are we going to live this way? We want to actually be free, and this is part of that process, right? People should be treated like other people. There was a change in the culture of this country, right? There was a change in the discussion of this country, and that had a lot to do with the ACT UP and activism around AIDS and people getting really organized and people fighting for their rights. It had a lot to do with millennials coming of age and having a very different view of what freedom and democracy looks like in a country. And the culture changed in this country because of activists, because of organizing. And then the dinosaurs, actual dinosaurs, in the courts were like, oh, I don't want to be seen as a bigot before I die, except for Scalia. And he just wanted to be seen as a bigot very clearly before he died. So what happens is things change in culture, and then politicians are like, oh, okay, maybe we should do something because I got to get elected every once in a while. And then after that, courts change. And that's the progress of things. It's like community views on things change, then becomes the possibility for legislative change, and then way after that comes the possibility for change through litigation. So I think where we are now is where courts will be in a little while, but we can do things to push them. And I think looking at that path, a lot of times people say, well, we need to get a law passed. And it's like, well, we need to get organized first and be able to build that power, because unions really know that, right? And other structures really know that. But I think looking at that path of success, I think we really are on that path in terms of police accountability and black liberation and liberation for other people of color and real liberation in this country. We're on that path.
Other panelists, NAACP, Curtis, plays a huge role in educating people and informing people about their rights, and they're a trusted voice in all of this. Do you have thoughts about sort of the role that the NAA and similar groups play in terms of seeing this kind of systemic reform from the field?
Well,
historically, yes, the NAACP and specifically the Boston branch have, through those litigation process, through those policy processes, and even on this timeline, I saw that between '64, when the desegregation of Boston public schools, and before the Boston branch even was able to file legislation regarding the Boston public school system not adhering to that act, it's slow. And a lot of times on the street, we continue to ask the Black community for patience when it comes to various things. And it becomes one thing with the example of education, where lives aren't directly impacted, and then those of public safety, when lives are directly, daily impacted by, as I told Chief Gross on Friday, that you always have the decision-making ability to end a life right there. That's what makes it different between when you're asking for community relations and police relations to come together and trying to solve it. Why is the onus, he asked, why is the onus always on the police? That's why. If I shoot you, if I kill you, you're going to come and kill me. If somebody else shoots them, they might be adjudicated. If you do it, we now have to ask, was it justified? Not in a way of, if it's not justified, you'll lose your job. And if it was, whatever. So, and I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. You know, it was interesting hearing that. There was a piece in a magazine recently that said the difference between Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter is Blue Lives Matter is a statement of fact, and Black Lives Matter remains aspirational. That made me think, you know. Erica, so you're representing, I think, the millennials.
Oh, okay.
We're not doing the second part yet, but I want to talk a little bit about this changes from the field, notes from the field kind of idea. So you've heard your colleagues up here talk a little bit about whether it's cameras or diversity on the force, ways to get change from within the system that we've been trying to do here locally in Massachusetts. Do you have any thoughts about whether it's from other states, other experiences that you're aware of, or generational thoughts?
Sure. Hello. I'm Derek. I'm from St. Louis. I am not from Boston, and I'm a huge Cardinals fan. I think that's important for me to say, which is a racist organization, but I like them as a baseball team. So I always find this language around, there's a distrust or an eroded distrust, in the community and with the police. And I always have a really hard time finding a time period where Black people and police were cool. Like, I have a really, really hard time a hard time finding that specific time period. And then the police decided to, change their mind. And now there's an erosion in trust. So I think it's important to have an honest conversation to say that as long as there's been contact between Black people, Indigenous people, people of color in this country, and police, it's never been one of a trustful relationship, right? We know this when we're reading Frederick Douglass, and he says that there are 100 crimes for which a Black man can commit, and if he commits one of those crimes, he's sentenced to death. And only 2 of those crimes, if a white man commits it, he's sentenced to death. Who enforces those laws, right? Who do we give the power to go out and hunt and kill people? Frederick Douglass is writing about this 100 years ago. He's saying that we allow citizens, just everyday Americans, to go out and to enforce the laws of this country. And then in 2016, we still have stand your ground laws. Right, so not only is policing power extended to actual, state actors, we also have civilians who have policing power. So I think it's important to think of the state and framing who is able to police who in this country, and that's very, very important. I am fascinated with Carl always, because Carl is really, really dynamic and really, really brilliant. And I was going to say agitation, right? It's agitation. What's the question? What's the role of a everyday civilian person in pushing the courts? And I think it's agitation. So I'm from St. Louis. About 3 weeks before I started law school here, Michael Brown was killed about 6 minutes from my house. And I remember, people on Facebook, because Facebook is such like a good source of like information. And they were just, this were all your brilliant friends post all of their thoughts from the comforts of their living room. And they were just like, why are people out in the street? Why are people destroying their neighborhoods? The Quick Trip that was burned down, I used to catch the bus past this Quick Trip every day to go to school. And I remember going to the Quick Trip, literally like, inhaling like the burnt pavement, like the building was completely destroyed. And I remember people asking, what is this going to solve? What is this going to bring? And what happened? There was a movement. There is a movement. You have organizations across the country, including in Boston, that launched in the wake of Michael Brown's murder, right? We have renewed conversations on policing in this country. We had a task force, even though I don't believe a whole lot in task force, but we've had several task forces created in different parts of this country, including a presidential task force. Again, not a huge fan. Including a presidential task force. We have laws, policies being drafted. We have people who are thinking about ways to engage the state in terms of shifting power back to communities. So none of that would have happened just with lawyers, right? Lawyers are not going to go in the street. Some lawyers, maybe Carl. Other lawyers are not going to go in the street and raise hell. Right? That's not going to happen. So yeah, I think that the most important. And that doesn't mean you need to go burn up a Quick Trip. I would be okay with that. But it's a personal decision if you decide to start fires. But I think that just metaphorically speaking, and in actual organizing, it's super important that people are in places where they're in conversation and constantly pushing against the system and not relying on traditional procedural ways of achieving justice, because that's not going to, like, we've been waiting for procedure, this old time, and this is where we are now. We're still asking this question, what do we do? And we've been asking this question for over a century.
Right, fabulous. Luska, going back to so 2 years ago, right? That was great. Thank you. And thank you for that. Luska, talk a little bit about how agitation did or didn't play a role, because 2 years ago, Police Commissioner Evans said, I'm not going to have body-worn cameras. We don't have a problem here.
Right.
We don't have, remember that? We
Right.
don't have a problem here.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, it's starting tomorrow.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about what, if any, role
Agitation played
in getting
played
that
a
to
big
happen.
role. So after Michael Brown's death, Shagun and Shakia, who are the founders, they got together. They were agitated. They were upset. They felt hopeless and helpless. That I think a lot of us felt after they see once again another unarmed black young man being killed. And they decided that they were going to kind of channel that and to organize. And neither one of them are attorneys. I'm actually the only attorney on the Boston Police Camera Action Team. The rest are a variety of different people from different backgrounds. So that's also a push that if you want to get involved, you don't have to be a lawyer in the legal system whatsoever. But it really took a lot of talking to other people, and before we even sat down to write our policy, we talked to community members to ask them how they were feeling, and we recorded that. So we kind of compiled and collected everyone's individual agitated sense of what was going on. We recorded it, and that was very effective in getting the police officers to know that there really is a problem. And then I would say during the city council hearings, there were amazing turnouts, and people would come and it was packed, and people would testify and literally look to Commissioner Evans while they were talking and tell stories of how they were discriminated against or how police misconduct has affected their lives. And I believe that that is what turned him around. I think he really wasn't aware. He even said at one council hearing, we don't have any bad apples in the Boston Police Department. And it took all of those people to look him in the eye and say, oh, about that, well, let me tell you. And now, all of a sudden, he has changed his mind and he understands the importance of body cameras and just, he testified to it. We were talking earlier about the importance of body cameras. What changed his mind? It was the people. It was the people going, expressing their agitation and telling personal stories. And that's the most important thing. And then if you talk to your representatives, if you talk to your city councilors, really tell them your personal stories. And I'll just tell a quick story that I told at a hearing. So my last year of law school, I was a Marshall Brennan Constitutional Literacy Fellow, and I taught constitutional law at the Jeremiah Burke School. And the day that I was going to be teaching about stop and frisk, I started off the class just informally, and these are 14, 15-year-old children, and said, how many of you guys have ever experienced being stop and frisked for no reason? And I was expecting a few hands. Every single hand they raised, every single person in that room, and these were children. So I testified and I said that because that's the kind of story that they need to hear so they can no longer claim there are no bad apples. If there are no bad apples, there's no reason why a classroom full of 14 and 15-year-old children would raise their hand to that. So.
I'm going to shift gears just a wee little bit and begin to talk about some radical visions for going forward. Partly because all of these topics we could spend the whole afternoon on, right? But I want to keep moving forward on this to make sure we're respectful of the time. So, Curtis, I'm actually going to start with you. Have you talk a little bit about theories of radical reform and change going forward? Set a stage for us.
Okay, well, I don't know how radical it is, but when I was in undergrad for criminal justice, one of the theories that I held on to was, I always mess up his name, so I'm not going to Mr. Ryman, but it was the Pyrrhic defeat theory, which or Pyrrhic, excuse me, if people are familiar with a Pyrrhic victory, which is a victory that comes at a heavy cost, militarily, or it's used in other industries now. A Pyrrhic defeat is actually a theory that suggests that the criminal justice system is working not for the favor of society, but for the favor of the few, the powerful, by means of exploiting and downtrodden the impoverished. Now, this was in 1978-79 when he proposed this theory, and it was more so about the war on poverty. Since then, we've had war on drugs, war on terror, war on whatever, and the faces of these wars are always the same, the ones that look like me. And by that, or because of that, when someone says criminal, automatically they think of me. So when you have somebody, I don't like to use his name, but let's say the former swimmer of the Stanford team, when they announce that he's been released, they announce it as the former swimmer of the Stanford team has been released, and not as a criminal, because if they said criminal, they would be giving a picture of somebody that looks like me instead of somebody that is not supposed to be associated with criminality. Or another example would be how the war on drugs have shifted from being criminal to being rehabilitative and looking to help those people, because We'll help people that we find humanity in, i.e. that looks like me, a person in power, instead of when we were waging war against that beast, i.e. somebody that looks like Curtis. And as somebody that has had to grow up in that, and I know others that have had to grow up in that, yeah. So, like, when we say, I don't want to cuss, so when we say F12, F the police, like, it's more than just something that we're saying to get a rise out of somebody. It really is F them, because they've been Fing me and people that look like me for all of my life since I was in the womb. And I've seen it. I gotta go and, well, I've decided to go and do things that are hopefully similar to lawyers, but I know that they have a position as officers of the courts that they can't do certain things that I'm able to do as an organizer and activist, and will continue to do, which is like have those candid conversations with those officers on the streets when they try and talk about community policing and don't know shit about what community policing is. And these are supposed to be people that are in charge of the Boston Police Department.
That was sufficiently radical. Thank you. Good. Erica, talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter and the recent policy prescriptions that came down. Give us a bit of a roadmap of where we can go with some of this. We've got a good foundation from Curtis. There's sort of some policy prescriptions. And Carl, then I'm going to go over to you next, so get ready.
Sure. So as we all, well, I'm assuming as we all know, the Black Lives Matter is the name of a movement. It's also the official name of an organization. It's also the name of a network and a hashtag. So it means a lot of things. So even in thinking about approaching police brutality and the Black liberation movement, there are going to be a lot of spokespeople speaking on behalf of the Black Lives Matter movement, network, organization, hashtag, etc. So even some of the ideas that are coming out of the Movement for Black Lives Policy Roundtable are not necessarily representative of all people who are deciding to now work in this movement. So I just think it's important that I sort of say that disclaimer. I also want to say something really, really quickly about bad apples, because this is also really, I think this is also just killing us, right? So I think I'm confident in saying that the people who are, doing this work in the Movement for Black Lives Policy Roundtable, and Law for Black Lives, and Black Lives Matter, maybe the network, I think many of us reject the bad apples theory of policing. Like, we know it's the whole damn orchard that's rotten. It's not just a few cops. Like, it can't, like, it literally can't be. There are systems and barriers of protections around police officers. And the second problem with thinking about police brutality, police abuse in terms of bad apples is that you're relying on the benevolence or the personality of individual cops and not the power that they have. So good cops and bad cops have the same amount of power. It doesn't matter if you're a bad apple. It doesn't matter if you're a fresh one. You have the same amount of power. And what's happening is that we have a movement that's attacking the power and not whether someone's a good person. So I really want us to, hopefully we can shift our thinking and how we're looking at people based on their personalities, based on their hearts, and really questioning the power that they have. So I think that's also important to think about, some of the ways that we're approaching it. So one, there's a move to demilitarize the police. Police officers have police departments. There are 12,000 police departments, 1 million cops. They've received about $4 billion in military equipment, ranging from tear gas canisters. Being tear gas is not fun. Like, it's not fun at all. It's a very, very traumatizing experience. To MRAPs, the tanks that we saw on the street in Ferguson and Baltimore and other places where there have been uprisings. So there's a huge push to demilitarize the police. Why do they need this for anyone? Well, we know because they use it to practice in other parts of the world, but that's a different conference. So demilitarize the police. There's also efforts to, along demilitarization, to limit the surveillance state. So there's some people in this movement who are actually pushing against body cameras because they just don't trust the state to properly regulate themselves to surveil Black and brown people. We know that Black and brown people, especially organizers, are surveilled in this movement. We know that's part of a global system where other people are surveilled. So people just do not trust the state with any form of surveillance. So that ranges from cameras on streetlights to body cameras. Like, there's a full range, but there are also people who are pushing for those decisions to be made locally. So if there are organizers who are working with their communities and they're pushing for certain changes, then, there's some people who say, that's the way to go. This is what a community thinks would benefit them. But just, check on the surveillance state. I want to talk about one more. The end of the privatization of police. So we know police are privatized. We know that jails are privatized. We know that there's a system that connects both of them. So if you have systems such as in Ferguson, but also in Louisiana, also in Mississippi, where private jails, where public defense is funded through fees associated with police activity, we know that incentivizes cops to lock up people to pay them, to pay the court. They're paying themselves, right? So when I read about Ferguson, the city of Ferguson was operating in the red, which is not a good thing. They're operating at a deficit. When they're choosing to raise fines in the city, they then give themselves a raise. Right, so the police department gave the mayor gave all municipal employees an 8% raise, as a result of police ticketing activities. So you're literally having police officers using private means of capital to fund the city. So we have to dismantle, disaggregate, tear apart anything that allows police officers to be incentivized to further police and engage in these practices that's ultimately going to benefit themselves.
So y'all have laid out a really great big vision of some of the things we need to be doing, going after the power structures themselves, right? Not tinkering. But how do we begin to do that? Carl?
So first, I was going to lay one groundwork in relation to something that Derek had just said. That the building of these systems that we see in Ferguson, we see in Baltimore, we see in Louisiana, and in smaller ways everywhere, right? Going, all the way back to the creation of this country, right? A lot of times we at the ACLU say the Constitution, there is a constitutional right, right? A little while ago I looked at, actually kind of inspired by something that young abolitionists had said about the 13th Amendment and the exception for slavery there. I went back and looked at the United States Constitution. The unamended Constitution has 4,400 words in it, right? 425 of those, so just about 10% of the Constitution, explicitly is about defending slavery or talking about how Native people have no rights in terms of counting for representation, or Black people have a proportional it gives the state a proportional representation in Congress. Not that they were bestowed on any rights, but they count as a percentage of a human being. That's 10% of the Constitution. It was written into. They never explicitly say Black people or other things. They never explicitly say slavery. So they knew what they were doing, right? And I say they specifically. I don't say we as this country, but they knew what they were doing when they created that. So when we come to today and we try to create radical changes, that's the point that we're going back to, right? Even before that point, to the creation of a constitution, that 10% of the words in that constitution are about controlling Black and Native bodies, right? That's what the foundation was about. And Curtis is right. I'm a lawyer. I'm not going to stand up here and use the term "fuck the police." I wouldn't say "fuck the police" in front of you, or FTP, or F12. I wouldn't say any of those things. I wouldn't. But I'm not going to say "fuck the police." It's a camera. But a thing that the movement has been talking about is demilitarizing, as Derek said, defunding the police, right? Taking money away from, like, the Boston Police Department just spent $70,000 on a new ice cream truck. I say a new ice cream truck because they had an old ice cream truck that wasn't very old. It's newer than, the old ice cream truck is newer than my car anyway. So they bought a new ice cream truck, right? And that's, they got a grant for that. So it's not like, you know, taxpayer money. It's taxpayer money that came through some other thing, right? That got whatever. But the fact that that's not something that we should, the Boston Police Department doesn't need to go out and give ice creams to people to make community relations better. They need to stop racist stop and frisk people, right? And I'll take it another step. They need to stop killing black and brown folks in the streets, right? When in places they can't. People should, if people don't know, they should look about the brother Usama Rahim, who was a terrorist. So a lot of times we're like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. The Boston Police Department referred to him as a terrorist. The FBI referred to him as a terrorist. He had allegedly had a knife, and police saw the need to shoot him numbers of times in sort of on a busy street in Roslindale. But the movement a lot has been talking about demilitarizing the police, defunding the police, demilitarizing, defunding, and ultimately disbanding the police. Like, so that's a prescription in some parts of the movement. And I think we all don't have to have the same vision of the piece of it that we're going to attack. But I think a lot of us need to, and that's why I started with the grounding of the Constitution. We need to think about how and why. And Huey Newton has a really great quote, dramatically, he's saying it while he's while he's being held in a jail, and he was talking about the way police occupy communities of color, black communities, and at the time he was talking about the United States invasion of South Vietnam, and saying that in many ways that is analogous to the way police exist in our communities, black communities and communities of color and immigrant communities in this country, because they're not there to protect our property because we don't own a lot of property, right? And I think looking at that from that paradigm in ways that Derica said, it answers a lot of the questions afterwards, right? It answers how are we going to go forward? What changes do we need to make?
Great, wonderful. Just so you all know, the organizers said we could go just a little bit over the 2:30 time, so we're going to go to about 2:40, just for your, like, knowing what's going on for those of you looking at the clock, before we break for the workshops. I want to unpack some of the stuff y'all put out just now. And Yvonne, I'm going to look to you, because there's an interesting, maybe creative tension, maybe not, between thinking about, on one hand, abolition, defund, disband the police on one hand, and then saying, let's organize within the police departments to get greater diversity. How do you reconcile, or do you reconcile those tensions?
I think all of these things have to coexist in order to have to create change, right? I don't think that one thing is more valuable than another. I think all of these ideas that have been put forth are certainly worthy of pursuing, and I think from my perspective, it's more about how do we coordinate efforts so that we are not all pushing the same thing, right? I think that there's been a tremendous amount of energy, for example, in the body cameras, which has been excellent, right? My organization, issued statements in support of the body cameras, but we didn't do the in-depth trench work that other folks sitting in this room and in this panel did to move that forward, because we were tackling the diversity front. And so I think that the ideas that have been shared are all worthy of pursuing, because we have to tackle this through multiple fronts. And so it's not the idea of what should we all be jumping into one bandwagon, but rather how do we coordinate this so that these are all train tracks that are moving in the same direction towards community inclusion and police reform. And I think that a couple of the things that I heard are really, really critical, because this idea of spending money on an ice cream truck, and thank you for reminding us about that. And I know that they, like you clarified, they didn't spend the money on the ice cream truck, but they are spending money fighting the litigation in court for things even like the body cameras, right? That took resources, money, and time to go in and try to fight an injunction. It takes money and time to be fighting the cases that we are bringing. Just this week in the Boston Globe, they found out that the city had spent over $350,000 just in the last 2.5 years fighting one of our cases. In just 2.5 years, $352,000 of Boston taxpayer money to defend discrimination. Let's be very clear about that. And that's in one case, right? And we have tons, and the ACLU has tons, and other organizations have others. So they are using taxpayer resources, maybe not for the ice cream truck, but certainly to go into court and challenge people who are bringing forward creative reform. And so what do we need? You know, at the Lawyers Committee, we've been pushing for, working within the systems that exist, pushing for bias training, cultural competency training. Each officer needs to be properly trained. They do not have any type of professionalized bias training, racial sensitivity training, cultural competency training. It does not exist in BPD. And if they tell you it does, ask them to show you the video. And then you'll see, after seeing that homemade thing, whether you think that is the professional standards that officers should be held accountable for when they interface with people who look like me and you on the ground, okay? And the other thing, talking about what we deserve, right? One of the things that, and I really appreciate what Carl was talking about in terms of the legal structure that we work in, but we have to remember that the legal structure is not static, right? When marriage, invoking what you laid out in the beginning of this discussion so articulately, when marriage was won, that decision from the Supreme Court in Obergefell had almost a dozen references to dignity. Dignity in the context of marriage, dignity in the context of a people wanting equality. Why can't we have dignity? Why haven't the courts talked about our experiences as people of color, as low-income people, as being deserving of having the same type of court-recognized dignity? We need to push for that. We need to push for that type of law, that type of case development. Use the same remedies that have been won in other contexts and advance them for our own struggle so that we can have legally recognized dignity. And so I think it's challenging because we're talking about a legal system that is set up to prevent us from achieving what we want to do, but we need to be able to use it strategically to fight for our dignity and for the type of reforms that we're talking about in this panel.
Thank you. Carl, I want you to say just a couple words to build on that about community precedent. We talk a lot about legal precedent, like when you have one decision, the courts have to follow it. Carl was talking to me the other day about this notion of community precedent. Maybe do it in the context of Glick and some of the...
Sure. So we always, at the ACLU, and lawyers talk about legal precedent, right? And the best legal precedent you can get is something that's based in the Constitution. That's at the United States Supreme Court, because that will affect, all the people in all of the states and, and the reservations and the territories and protectorates in the United States, right? If a decision is made in the Supreme Court. And I had a problem with this because I said, but there's other parts, and there's not a name for this other thing, so I said, it's really community precedent, right? It's setting an example in communities, right? And that's things that people do regularly, right? And one of the things we, the ACLU plug again, we, in 2011, my coworkers, in association with the law firm of Howard Friedman, did a case which is called Glick versus Cuniff. Cuniff was a Boston police officer who stopped someone from filming something on Boston, stopped a citizen from filming, or a person from filming police officers on Boston Common. That case it bounced around a little bit in federal court. Ultimately, the First Circuit Court of Appeals, one step below the Supreme Court, made a decision and said people have a First Amendment protected right to record the police. In that, everyone here probably knows or has seen a video of someone, a police encounter, police beating someone, police murdering someone, video, right? And when people do this in Massachusetts, I always ask them, or if I meet someone who recorded an incident, I said, how did you know that you could do that? And they said, well, because I think I have a right, maybe. I think I can do that. And I said, do you know if there was a case or a law, or has it always been that way? And people a lot of times say, well, it hasn't always been that way. I think something changed, but I don't know. And they won't know the case glick a lot of times, they won't know that. But they know they can do that. And I'll just say a case that we represented someone in recently, which people probably, this was a video that an activist filmed, and a lot of people, like 500,000 people I think at the time saw it. A woman was arrested on a bus in Dudley Square. It's almost exactly a year ago now. And a police officer pulled a gun out on her. He beat her with a metal club. He pepper sprayed her. But in the video, aside from the horrifying beating, there's an amazing thing that you can see. You can see 10 other people filming the incident. And then the police officer pulls out a semi-automatic pistol. He pulls out a 9mm and points it at this woman who's 4'10" and is a young black woman, and he's pointing at her. She's terrified. And all of the people in the crowd are yelling. They're saying, put the gun away. Put your gun away. You should be ashamed. Put your gun away. Right? And they're on a bus, a very small bus, with him with a semi-automatic pistol. And he does. He puts the gun away. Right? Because they're yelling at him. Because they actually start yelling at him, then they start sort of pleading with him. And I'll say just a year before that, we also are defending a case, a woman named Mary Holmes, who a very, very similar thing happened. But in that case, this was before Michael Brown was murdered in St. Louis and Ferguson. This was before the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. A very, very similar thing happens. It's caught on not civilian camera, but it's caught on security camera from Dudley Station. And people, you can see all the people in Dudley Square, and for people who know Dudley Square, there's a lot of people around. There are people concerned about issues. All the people are just backing up. No one's videotaping it. No one's cell phone recording it. And people are trying to help the woman. She dropped some of her things. People pick up her packages, her cell phone that she dropped. They later return them to her. So they're very supportive of her, but they don't know what to do. The thing that changed in that year is a community precedent has been set. People said, look, we're not going to take this shit anymore. We're going to fight back. We're going to resist. We know what you're doing is wrong, and we know other people in the community will support this. So one of the things that we can do, every single person here can do, right? If you have the day off tomorrow, if you want to take the day off tomorrow, or any time for the existence of this system, you can go into court and watch. And if you go into Roxbury Court, you go into Dorchester Court, you go into Boston Municipal Court, you will see people being held in jail on very small bails for no reason, oh, this is your second case and you one time didn't show up, $250 bail, where they know the person doesn't have $250 bail because they know the person is indigent. And I'll say the Mass Bail Fund, Norma's over there, you should wave to you, is doing things. They are getting people free. They are getting people out of jail and doing that work, right? Because very small amounts of money people can get people free. Yeah, so they're getting people. They're creating a thing where people will fight their cases because they're not sitting in jail waiting for it. And that type of thing, people going into court watching, people challenging the system, people recording the police. And I'll say in the case of, I didn't say her name, but in Shalice Biddle, the case where the weapon was pointed in this young woman's face, people followed her. I was actually here at Harvard speaking on a panel. My phone was burning, ringing, because all these activists were like, what do we do? But they followed her to the MBTA police station. They didn't know her from anything. They bailed her out of jail, and they took her to get dinner that night. They didn't know her at all. But those types of things are happening, and the community is coming around to support community activism, to support people in our community who are being victimized by police. And that, I think, is the most incredible thing for me, for the movement.
Right, so we just had, yeah. So we just have a couple of minutes left before we're going to break and to go to our workshops. And so before I turn it over for the last word to Derica, so Derica, get ready. You don't have to. I want to see if anybody else on the panel wants to have just a quick word about things that, takeaway points, things that people here can do to really work not only towards learning from the tactical lessons that we've been talking about and what we can do, but also to think about ways that we can all contribute to a radical vision of reform in policing in the United States. So anybody else, Curtis or Luska, anybody who hasn't spoken recently want to say a takeaway? And Derek, I am going to give you the last word. Go ahead.
Real quickly, and I've always been told not to tell my actual thoughts because for self-preservation, I'll say that. But so how I can say it is that we really need to start thinking about alternatives to the shit that we are in, collectively thinking about alternatives, because it's not working. We know it's not working. We have conferences like this that prove that it's not working. The powers that be aren't going to say that it's not working because they're benefiting, but the rest of society is not. We need to think of alternatives and come together with those alternatives.
You're here, right?
I have ideas, but again, I'm not going to give my immediate thoughts because, one, I'm thinking about writing a book or some other shit.
I thought it was because you were leading a workshop right after this.
It's a science fiction book, but
Oh,
it can easily go to a biopic real quick.
Can't wait. Muska, any final?
Just last thoughts is just I want to plug the Boston Police Camera Action Team one more time. And if you go to the website, it's bpcat.org and sign up. We really need your help. Thank you.
Derica.
Yeah, I don't know what you want me to say.
Anything you want.
Get free or die trying.
There you go.
That's what I'm going to say.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody, and let's carry it forward to the workshop. And thank you, panelists.